We followed up with, I believe, a full legal contract where they certified that they had deleted the data.
In a legal contract?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And then you ultimately said that you have banned Cambridge Analytica. Who exactly is banned? What if they opened up Cranston, Rhode Island Analytica? Different corporate form, same enterprise. Would that enterprise also be banned?
Senator, that is certainly the intent. Cambridge Analytica actually has a parent company, and we banned the parent company. And recently, we also banned a firm called AIQ, which I think is also associated with them. And if we find other firms that are associated with them, we will block them from the platform as well.
Are individual principals, PALS principals of the firm, also banned?
Senator, my understanding is we're blocking them from doing business on the platform, but I do not believe that we're blocking people's personal accounts.
Okay. Can any customer amend your terms of service? Or is the terms of service a take it or leave it proposition for the average customer?
Senator, I think the terms of service are what they are, but the service is really defined by people because you get to choose what information you share, and the whole service is about which friends you connect to, which people you choose to connect to.
My question would relate to Senator Graham held up that big fat document. It's easy to put a lot of things buried in a document that then later turn out to be of consequence. And all I wanted to establish with you is that that document that Senator Graham held up, that is not a negotiable thing with individual customers. That is a take it or leave it proposition for your customers to sign up to or not use the service.
Senator, that's right on the terms of service, although we offer a lot of controls so people can configure the experience how they want.
So last question on a different subject having to do with the authorization process that you are undertaking for entities that are putting up political content or so-called issue ad content. You've said that they all have to go through an authorization process before they do it. You said here, we will be verifying the identity. How do you look behind a shell corporation and find who's really behind it through your authorization process? Well, step back. Do you need to look behind shell corporations in order to find out who is really behind the content that's being posted? And if you may need to look behind a shell corporation, how will you go about doing that? How will you get back to the true, what lawyers would call beneficial owner of the site that is putting out the political material?
Senator, are you referring to the verification of political and issue ads?
Yes. And before that, political ads, yes.
Yes. So what we're going to do is require a valid government identity, and we're going to verify the location. So we're going to do that so that way someone sitting in Russia, for example, couldn't say that they're in America and therefore able to run an election ad.
But if they were running through a corporation domiciled in Delaware, you wouldn't know that they were actually a Russian owner.
Senator, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired, and I appreciate the courtesy of the chair for the extra seconds. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I wanted to follow up on a statement that you made shortly before the break, just a few minutes ago. You said that there are some categories of speech, some types of content that Facebook would never want to have any part of, and it takes active steps to avoid disseminating, including hate speech, nudity, racist speech. I assume you also meant terrorist acts, threats of physical violence, things like that. Beyond that, would you agree that Facebook ought not be putting its thumb on the scale with regard to the content of speech, assuming it fits out of one of those categories that's prohibited?
Senator, yes. There are generally two categories of content that we're very worried about. One are things that could cause real-world harm. So terrorism certainly fits into that. Self-harm fits into that. I would consider election interference to fit into that. And those are the types of things that we I don't really consider there to be much discussion around whether those are good or bad topics.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. What I'm asking is, once you get beyond those categories of things that are prohibited and should be, is it Facebook's position that it should not be putting its thumb on the scale? It should not be favoring or disfavoring speech based on its content, based on the viewpoint of that speech?
Senator, in general, that's our position. One of the things that is really important, though, is that in order to create a service where everyone has a voice, we also need to make sure that people aren't bullied or basically intimidated or the environment feels unsafe for them.
Okay. So when you say in general, that's the exception that you're referring to. The exception being that if someone feels bullied, even if it's not a terrorist act, nudity, terrorist threats, racist speech, or something like that, you might step in there. Beyond that, would you step in and put your thumb on the scale as far as the viewpoint of the content being posted?
Senator, no. I mean, in general, our goal is to allow people to have as much expression as possible.
Okay. So subject to the exceptions we've discussed, you would stay out of that. Let me ask you this. Isn't there a significant free market incentive that a social media company, including yours, has in order to safeguard the data of your users? Don't you have free market incentives? And in that respect,
Senator, yes.
Don't your interests align with those of us here who want to see data safeguarded?
Absolutely.
Do you have the technological means available at your disposal to make sure that that doesn't happen and to protect, say, an app developer from transferring Facebook data to a third party?
Senator, a lot of that we do, and some of that happens outside of our systems and will require new measures. So, for example, what we saw here was people chose to share information with an app developer. That worked according to how the system was designed. That information was then transferred out of our system to servers that this developer, Alexander Kogan, had, and then that person chose to then go sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. That is going to require much more active intervention and auditing from us to prevent going forward, because once it's out of our system, it is a lot harder for us to have a full understanding of what's happening.
From what you've said today and from previous statements made by you and other officials at your company, data is at the center of your business model. It's how you make money. Your ability to run your business effectively, given that you don't charge your users, is based on monetizing data. And so the real issue, it seems to me, really comes down to what you tell the public, what you tell users of Facebook about what you're going to do with the data, about how you're going to use it. Can you give me a couple of examples, maybe 2 examples of ways in which data is collected by Facebook in a way that people are not aware of? 2 examples of types of data that Facebook collects that might be surprising to Facebook users.
Well, Senator, I would hope that what we do with data is not surprising to people.
And has it been at times?
Well, Senator, I think in this case, people certainly didn't expect this developer to sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. In general, there are 2 types of data that Facebook has. The vast majority, and then the first category, is content that people chose to share on the service themselves. So that's all the photos that you share, the posts that you make, what you think of as the Facebook service, right? That's everyone has control every single time that they go to share that. They can delete that data anytime they want. Full control, the majority of the data. The second category is around specific data that we collect in order to make the advertising experiences better and more relevant and work for businesses. And those often revolve around measuring, okay, if we showed you an ad and then you click through and you go somewhere else, we can measure that you actually, that the ad worked. That helps make the experience more relevant and better for people who are getting more relevant ads, and better for the businesses because they perform better. You also have control completely of that second type of data. You can turn off the ability for Facebook to collect that. Your ads will get worse, so a lot of people don't want to do that. But you have complete control over what you do there as well.
Senator Schatz. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the questions around the terms of service. Your terms of service are about 3,200 words with 30 links. One of the links is to your data policy, which is about 2,700 words with 22 links. And I think the point has been well made that people really have no earthly idea what they're signing up for. And I understand that at the present time that's legally binding, but I'm wondering if you can explain to the billions of users in plain language, what are they signing up for?
Senator, that's a good and important question here. In general, you sign up for the Facebook. You get the ability to share the information that you want with people. That's what the service is, right? Is that you can connect with the people that you want, and you can share whatever content matters to you, whether that's photos or links or posts. And you get control over who you share it with, and you can take it down if you want, and you don't need to put anything up in the first place if you don't want.
What about the part that people are worried about, not the fun part?
Well, what's that?
The part that people are worried about is that the data is going to be improperly used. So people are trying to figure out, are your DMs informing the ads? Are your browsing habits being collected? Everybody kind of understands that when you click like on something, or if you say you like a certain movie or have a particular political proclivity, that I think that's fair game. Everybody understands that. What we don't understand exactly, because both as a matter of practice and as a matter of not being able to decipher those terms of service and the privacy policy, is what exactly are you doing with the data, and do you draw a distinction between data collected in the process of utilizing the platform and that which we clearly volunteer to the public to present ourselves to other Facebook users?
Senator, I'm not sure I fully understand this. In general, people come to Facebook to share content with other people. We use that in order to also inform how we rank services like newsfeed and ads to provide more relevant experiences.
Let me try a couple of specific examples. If I'm emailing within WhatsApp, does that ever inform your advertisers?
No, we don't see any of the content in WhatsApp. It's fully encrypted.
Right, but is there some algorithm that spits out some information to your ad platform, and then let's say I'm emailing about Black Panther within WhatsApp? Do I get a Black Panther banner ad?
Senator, Facebook systems do not see the content of messages being transferred over WhatsApp.
Yeah, I know, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about whether these systems talk to each other without a human being touching it.
Senator, I think the answer to your specific question is if you message someone about Black Panther on WhatsApp, it would not inform any ads.
Okay. I want to follow up on Senator Nelson's original question, which is the question of ownership of the data. And I understand as a sort of matter of principle, you're saying, we want our customers to have more rather than less control over the data. But I can't imagine that it's true as a legal matter that I actually own my Facebook data because you're the one monetizing it. Do you want to modify that to sort of express that as a statement of principle, a sort of aspirational goal? But it doesn't seem to me that we own our own data, otherwise we'd be getting a cut.
Well, Senator, you own it in the sense that you choose to put it there, you could take it down any time, and you completely control the terms under which it's used. When you put it on Facebook, you are granting us a license to be able to show it to other people. I mean, that's necessary in order for the service to operate.
Right, but so your definition of ownership is I sign up, I voluntarily, and I may delete my account if I wish, but that's basically it.
Well, Senator, I think that the control is much more granular than that. You can choose each photo that you want to put up or each message, and you can delete those. And you don't need to delete your whole account. You have specific control. You can share different posts with different people.
In the time I have left, I want to propose something to you and take it for the record. I read an interesting article this week by Professor Jack Balkin at Yale that proposes a concept of an information fiduciary. People think of fiduciaries as responsible primarily in the economic sense, but this is really about a trust relationship, like doctors and lawyers. Tech companies should hold in trust our personal data. Are you open to the idea of information fiduciary enshrined in statute?
Senator, I think it's certainly an interesting idea, and Jack is very thoughtful in this space, so I do think it deserves consideration.
Thank you.
Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. I appreciate your testimony. The full scope of a Facebook user's activity can print a very personal picture, I think. And additionally, you have those 2 billion users that are out there every month, and so we all know that's larger than the population of most countries. So how many data categories do you store, does Facebook store, on the categories that you collect?
Senator, can you clarify what you mean by data categories?
There's some past reports that have been out there that indicate that that Facebook collects about 96 data categories for those 2 billion active users. That's 192 billion data points that are being generated, I think, at any time from consumers globally. So how many does Facebook store out of that? Do you store any?
Senator, I'm not actually sure what that is referring to.
On the points that you collect information, if we call those categories, how many do you store of information that you are collecting?
Senator, the way I think about this is there are 2 broad categories. This probably doesn't line up with whatever the specific report that you were seeing is, and I can make sure that we follow up with you afterwards to get you the information you need on that. The 2 broad categories that I think about are content that a person has chosen to share and that they have complete control over. They get to control when they put it into the service, when they take it down, who sees it. And then the other category are data that are connected to making the ads relevant. You have complete control over both. You can turn off the data related to ads. You can choose not to share any content or control exactly who sees it or take down the content in the former category.
And does Facebook store any of that?
Yes.
How much do you store of that? All of it? All of it? Everything we click on? Is that in storage somewhere?
Senator, we store data about what people share on the service and information that's required to do ranking better, to show you what you care about in news feed.
Do you store text history, user content, activity, device location?
Senator, some of that content, with people's permission, we do store.
Do you disclose any of that?
Yes, Senator, in order for people to share that information with Facebook, I believe that almost everything that you just said would be opt-in.
Right. And the privacy settings, it's my understanding that they limit the sharing of that data with other Facebook users. Is that correct?
Senator, yes. Okay. Every person gets to control who gets to see their content.
And does that also limit the ability for Facebook to collect and use it?
Senator, yes, there are controls that determine what Facebook can do as well. So, for example, people have a control about face recognition. If people don't want us to be able to help identify when they're in photos that their friends upload, then they can turn that off.
Right.
And then we won't store that kind of template for them.
And there was some action taken by the FTC in 2011. And you wrote a Facebook post at the time on a public page on the internet that it used to seem scary to people, but as long as they could make their page private, they felt safe sharing with their friends online. Control was key. And you just mentioned control. Senator Hatch asked you a question and you responded there about complete control. So you and your company have used that term repeatedly, and I believe you use it to reassure users. Is that correct? That you do have control and complete control over this information?
Well, Senator, this is how the service works. The core thing that Facebook is and all of our services, WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger.
So is this then a question of Facebook is about feeling safe, or are users actually safe? Is Facebook being safe?
Senator, I think Facebook is safe. I use it, and my family use it, and all the people I love and care about use it all the time. These controls are not just to make people feel safe, it's actually what people want in the product. The reality is that when you, just think about how you use this yourself. You don't want to share, like you take a photo, you're not going to always send that to the same people. Sometimes you're going to want to text it to one person. Sometimes you might send it to a group. I bet you have a page. You'll probably want to put some stuff out there publicly so you can communicate with your constituents. There are all these different groups of people that someone might want to connect with, and those controls are very important in practice for the operation of the service, not just to build trust, although I think that providing people with control also does that, but actually in order to make it so that people can fulfill their goals with the service.
Senator Coons.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for joining us today. I think the whole reason we're having this hearing is because of a tension between two basic principles you've laid out. First, you've said about the data that users post on Facebook, you control and own the data that you put on Facebook. You've said some very positive, optimistic things about privacy and data ownership. But it's also the reality that Facebook is a for-profit entity that generated $40 billion in ad revenue last year by targeting ads. In fact, Facebook claims that advertising makes it easy to find the right people, capture their attention, and get results. And you recognize that an ad-supported service is, as you said earlier today, best aligned with your mission and values. But the reality is there's a lot of examples where ad targeting has led to results that I think we would all disagree with or dislike or would concern us. You've already admitted that Facebook's own ad tools allowed Russians to target users, voters, based on racist or anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant views, and that may have played a significant role in an election here in the United States. Just today, Time magazine posted a story saying that wildlife traffickers are continuing to use Facebook tools to advertise illegal sales of protected animal parts. And I am left questioning whether your ad targeting tools would allow other concerning practices like diet pill manufacturers targeting teenagers who are struggling with their weight, or allowing a liquor distributor to target alcoholics, or a gambling organization to target those with gambling problems. I'll give you one concrete example I'm sure you're familiar with. ProPublica back in 2016 highlighted that Facebook lets advertisers exclude users by race in real estate advertising. There was a way that you could say that this particular ad, I only want to be seen by white folks, not by people of color, and that clearly violates fair housing laws and our basic sense of fairness in the United States. And you promptly announced that that was a bad idea, you were going to change the tools, and that you would build a new system to spot and reject discriminatory ads that violate our commitment to fair housing. And yet a year later, a follow-up story by ProPublica said that those changes hadn't fully been made, and it was still possible to target housing advertisement in a way that was racially discriminatory. And my concern is that this practice of making bold and engaging promises about changes in practices and then the reality of how Facebook has operated in the real world are in persistent tension. Several different senators have asked earlier today about the 2011 FTC consent decree that required Facebook to better protect users' privacy. And there are a whole series of examples where there have been things brought to your attention where Facebook has apologized and has said we're going to change our practices and our policies, and yet there doesn't seem to have been as much follow-up as would be called for. At the end of the day, policies aren't worth the paper they're written on if Facebook doesn't enforce them. And I'll close with a question that's really rooted in an experience I had today as an avid Facebook user. I woke up this morning and was notified by a whole group of friends across the country asking if I had a new family or if there was a fake Facebook post of Chris Coons. I went to the one they suggested. It had a different middle initial than mine. And there's my picture with Senator Dan Sullivan's family. Same schools I went to, but a whole lot of Russian friends. Dan Sullivan's got a very attractive family, by the way. And
keep that for the record there, Mr. Chairman.
The friends who brought this to my attention included people I went to law school with in Hawaii and our own Attorney General in the state of Delaware. And fortunately, I've got great folks who work in my office. I brought it to their attention. They pushed Facebook, and it was taken down by midday. But I'm left worried about what happens to Delawareans who don't have these resources. It's still possible to find Russian trolls operating in the platform. Hate groups thrive in some areas of Facebook, even though your policies prohibit hate speech and you've taken strong steps against extremism and terrorists. But is a Delawarean who's not in the Senate going to get the same sort of quick response? I've already gotten input from other friends who say they've had trouble getting a positive response when they've brought to Facebook's attention a page that's, frankly, clearly violative of your basic principles. My core question is, isn't it Facebook's job to better protect its users? And why do you shift the burden to users to flag inappropriate content and make sure it's taken down?
Senator, there are a number of important points in there, and I think it's clear that this is an area, content policy enforcement, that we need to do a lot better on over time. The history of how we got here is we started off in my dorm room with not a lot of resources and not having the AI technology to be able to proactively identify a lot of this stuff. So just because of the sheer volume of content, the main way that this works today is that people report things to us, and then we have our team review that. And as I said before, by the end of this year, we're going to have more than 20,000 people at the company working on security and content review because this is important. Over time, we're going to shift increasingly to a method where more of this content is flagged upfront by AI tools that we develop. We've prioritized the most important types of content that we can build AI tools for today, like terror-related content, where I mentioned earlier that our systems that we deploy, I think, are taking down 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda-related content that we take down before a person even flags them to us. If we fast forward 5 or 10 years, I think we're going to have more AI technology that can do that in more areas. And I think we need to get there as soon as possible, which is why we're investing in that.
I couldn't agree more. I just think we can't wait 5 years to get housing discrimination and personally offensive material out of Facebook. Thank you.
I agree.
Chairman.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks for being here. At current pace, you're due to be done with first round of questioning by about 1 a.m., so congratulations. I like Chris Coons a lot, with his own family or with Dan Sullivan's family. Both are great photos. But I want to ask a similar set of questions from the other side, maybe. I think the conceptual line between mere tech company, mere tools, and an actual content company, I think it's really hard. I think you guys have a hard challenge. I think regulation over time will have a hard challenge. And you're a private company, so you can make policies that may be less than First Amendment full spirit embracing, in my view. But I worry about that. I worry about a world where when you go from violent groups to hate speech in a hurry, in one of your responses to one of the opening questions, you may decide, or Facebook may decide, it needs to police a whole bunch of speech that I think America might be better off not having policed by one company that has a really big and powerful platform. Can you define hate speech?
Senator, I think that this is a really hard question, and I think it's one of the reasons why we struggle with it. There are certain definitions that we have around calling for violence or
let's just agree on that. If somebody's calling for violence, that shouldn't be there. I'm worried about the psychological categories around speech. You used language of safety and protection earlier. We see this happening on college campuses all across the country. It's dangerous. 40% of Americans under age 35 tell pollsters they think the First Amendment is dangerous because you might use your freedom to say something that hurts somebody else's feelings. Guess what? There are some really passionately held views about the abortion issue on this panel today. Can you imagine a world where you might decide that pro-lifers are prohibited from speaking about their abortion views on your content, on your platform?
I certainly would not want that to be the case.
But it might really be unsettling to people who've had an abortion to have an open debate about that, wouldn't it?
It might be, but I don't think that would fit any of the definitions of what we have. But I do generally agree with the point that you're making, which is as we're able to technologically shift towards especially having AI proactively look at content, I think that that's going to create massive questions for society about what obligations we want to require companies to fulfill. And I do think that that's a question that we need to struggle with as a country, because I know other countries are, and they're putting laws in place. And I think that America needs to figure out and create the set of principles that we want American companies to operate under.
Thanks. I wouldn't want you to leave here today and think there's sort of a unified view in the Congress that you should be moving toward policing more and more and more speech. I think violence has no place on your platform. Sex traffickers and human traffickers have no place on your platform. But vigorous debates, adults need to engage in vigorous debates. I have only a little less than 2 minutes left, so I want to shift gears a little bit. But that was about adults. You're a dad. I'd like to talk a little bit about social media addiction. You started your comments today by talking about how Facebook is and was founded as an optimistic company. You and I have had conversations separate from here. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think as you've aged, you might be a little bit less idealistic and optimistic than you were when you started Facebook. As a dad, do you worry about social media addiction as a problem for America's teens?
Well, my hope is that we can be idealistic but have a broad view of our responsibility. To your point about teens, this is certainly something that I think any parent thinks about, is how much do you want your kids using technology? At Facebook specifically, I view our responsibility as not just building services that people like, but building services that are good for people and good for society as well. So we study a lot of effects of well-being of our tools and broader technology. And like any tool, there are good and bad uses of it. What we find in general is that if you're using social media in order to build relationships, right? So you're sharing content with friends, you're interacting, then that is associated with all of the long-term measures of well-being that you would intuitively think of. Long-term health, long-term happiness, long-term feeling connected, feeling less lonely. But if you're using the internet and social media primarily to just passively consume content and you're not engaging with other people, then it doesn't have those positive effects and it could be negative.
We're almost at time, so I want to ask you one more. Do social media companies hire consulting firms to help them figure out how to get more dopamine feedback loops so that people don't want to leave the platform?
No, Senator. That's not how we talk about this or how we set up our product teams. We want our products to be valuable to people, and if they're valuable, then people choose to use them.
Are you aware of other social media companies that do hire such consultants?
Not sitting here today.
Thanks.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
In response to Senator Blumenthal's pointed questions, you refused to answer whether Facebook should be required by law to obtain clear permission from users before selling or sharing their personal information. So I'm going to ask it one more time. Yes or no? Should Facebook get clear permission from users before selling or sharing sensitive information about your health, your finances, your relationships? Should you have to get their permission? That's essentially the consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission that you signed in 2011. Should you have to get permission? Should the consumer have to opt in?
Senator, we do require permission to use the system and to put information in there and for all the uses of it. I want to be clear. We don't sell information. So regardless of whether we could get permission to do that, that's just not a thing that we're going to go do.
So would you support legislation? I have a bill, Senator Blumenthal referred to it, the Consent Act, that would just put on the books a law that said that Facebook and any other company that gathers information about Americans has to get their permission, their affirmative permission, before it can be reused for other purposes. Would you support that legislation to make it a national standard for not just Facebook, but for all the other companies out there, some of them bad actors? Would you support that legislation?
Senator, in general, I think that principle is exactly right, and I think we should have a discussion around how to best codify
would you
that.
support legislation to back that general principle, that opt-in, that getting permission is the standard? Would you support legislation to make that the American standard? Europeans have passed that as a law. Facebook's going to live with that law beginning on May 25th. Would you support that as the law in the United States?
Senator, as a principle, yes, I would. I think the details matter a lot.
Right,
And
but
now that,
assuming that we work out the details, you do support opt-in as the standard, getting permission affirmatively as the standard for the United States. Is that correct?
Senator, I think that that's the right principle. And 100 billion times a day in our services, when people go to share content, they choose who they want to share it affirmatively.
You could support a law that enshrines that as the promise that we make to the American people that permission has to be obtained before their information is used. Is that correct?
Senator, yes. I've
Okay.
said that in principle, I think that that makes sense,
Okay.
and the details matter. And I look forward to having our team work with you on fleshing that out.
Right. So the next subject, because I want to, again, I want to make sure that we kind of drill down here. You earlier made reference to the Child Online Privacy Protection Act of 1999, which I am the author of. So that is the Constitution for child privacy protection online in the country, and I'm very proud of that. But there are no protections additionally for a 13, a 14, or a 15-year-old. They get the same protections that a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old get. So I have a separate piece of legislation to ensure that kids who are under 16 absolutely have a privacy bill of rights, and that permission has to be received from their parents or the children before any of their information is reused for any other purpose other than that which was originally intended. Would you support a child online privacy bill of rights for kids under 16 to guarantee that that information is not reused for any other purpose without explicit permission from the parents or the kids?
Senator, I think as a general principle, I think protecting minors and protecting their privacy is extremely important. And we do a number of things on Facebook to do that already, which I'm happy to get into.
And I appreciate it. I'm talking about a law. I'm talking about a law. Would you support a law to ensure that kids under 16 have this privacy bill of rights? I had this conversation with you in your office 7 years ago about this specific subject in Palo Alto. And I think that's really what the American people want to know right now. What is the protections of this? What are the protections that are going to be put on the books for their families, but especially for their children? Would you support a privacy bill of rights for kids where opt-in is the standard? Yes or no?
Senator, I think that that's an important principle. And
I appreciate that.
And I think we should.
Do we need a law to protect those children? That's my question to you. Do you believe we need a law to do so? Yes or no?
Senator, I'm not sure if we need a law, but I think that this is certainly a thing that deserves a lot of discussion.
I couldn't disagree with you more. We're leaving these children to the most rapacious commercial predators in the country who will exploit these children unless we absolutely have a law on the books.
Please,
and I think it is absolutely
Please give a short answer.
Senator, I look forward to having my team follow up to flesh out the details of it.
I don't think this is a
Senator
difficult
Flake. Senator Flake.
issue to get a correct answer to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thanks for enduring so far. And I'm sorry if I plow old ground. I had to be away for a bit. Myself and Senator Kuhn, Senator Peters, and a few others were in the country of Zimbabwe just a few days ago. We met with opposition figures who had talked about, their goal is to be able to have access to state-run media in many African countries, many countries around the world, third world countries, small countries. The only traditional media is state-run. And we asked them how they get their message out, and it's through social media. Facebook provides a very valuable service in many countries for opposition leaders or others who simply don't have access, unless maybe just before an election, to traditional media. So that's very valuable, and I think we all recognize that. On the flip side, we've seen with the Rohingya, that example of where the state can use similar data or use this platform to go after people. You talked about what you're doing in that regard, hiring more traditional or local language speakers. What else are you doing in that regard to ensure that these states don't, or these governments go after opposition figures or others?
Senator, there are three main things that we're doing in Myanmar specifically, and that will apply to other situations like that. The first is hiring enough people to do local language support, because the definition of hate speech or things that can be racially coded to incite violence are very language specific, and we can't do that with just English speakers for people around the world, so we need to grow that. The second is, in these countries there tend to be active civil society who can help us identify the figures who are spreading hate. And we can work with them in order to make sure that those figures don't have a place on our platform. The third is that there are specific product changes that we can make in order to, that might be necessary in some countries but not others, including things around news literacy, right? And encouraging people in different countries about ramping up or down things that we might do around fact-checking of content, specific product-type things that we would want to implement in different places. But I think that that's something that we're going to have to do in a number of countries.
There are obviously limits, native speakers that you can hire or people that have eyes on the page. Artificial intelligence is going to have to take the bulk of this. How much are you investing and working on that tool to do what really we don't have or can't hire enough people to do?
Senator, I think you're absolutely right that over the long term, building AI tools is going to be the scalable way to identify and root out most of this harmful content. Mm-hmm. We're investing a lot in doing that, as well as scaling up the number of people who are doing content review. One of the things I've mentioned is in this year, or in the last year, we've basically doubled the number of people doing security and content review. We're going to have more than 20,000 people working on security and content review by the end of this year. So it's going to be continuing to grow the people who are doing review in these places with building AI tools, which we're working as quickly as we can on that, but some of this stuff is just hard. That, I think, is going to help us get to a better place on eliminating more of this harmful content.
Thank you. You've talked some about this, I know. Do you believe that Russian and or Chinese governments have harvested Facebook data and have detailed data sets on Facebook users? Has your forensic analysis shown you who else other than Cambridge Analytica downloaded this kind of data?
Senator, we have kicked off an investigation of every app that had access to a large amount of people's data before we locked down the platform in 2014. That's underway. I imagine we'll find some things, and we are committed to telling the people who are affected when we do. I don't think sitting here today that we have specific knowledge of other efforts by those nation states, but in general, we assume that a number of countries are trying to abuse our systems.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Person is Senator Hirano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has proposed a new extreme vetting initiative, which they have renamed Visa Life Cycle Vetting. That sounds less scary. They have already held an industry day that they advertised on the federal contracting website to get input from tech companies on the best way to, among other things, and I'm quoting ICE, exploit publicly available information such as media, blogs, public hearings, conferences, academic websites, social media websites such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to extract pertinent information regarding targets. And basically what they want to do with these targets is to determine, and again I'm quoting the ICE's own document, they want, ICE has been directed to develop processes that determine and evaluate an applicant's, i.e. target's probability of becoming a positively contributing member of society, as well as their ability to contribute to national interest in order to meet the executive order, that is the president's executive order. And then ICE must also develop a mechanism or methodology that allows them to assess whether an applicant intends to commit criminal or terrorist acts after entering the United States. A question to you is, does Facebook plan to cooperate with this extreme vetting initiative and help the Trump administration target people for deportation or other ICE enforcement?
Senator, I don't know that we've had specific conversations around that. In general,
well, if you were asked to provide or cooperate with ICE so that they could determine whether somebody's going to commit a crime, for example, or become fruitful members of our society, would you cooperate?
We would not proactively do that. We cooperate with law enforcement in two cases. One is if we become aware of an imminent threat of harm, then we will proactively reach out to law enforcement, as we believe is our responsibility to do. The other is when law enforcement reaches out to us with a valid legal subpoena or request for data. In those cases, if their request is overly broad or we believe it's not a legal request, then we're going to push back aggressively.
Well, let's assume that ICE doesn't have a law, there's no law or rule that requires that Facebook cooperate to allow them to get this kind of information so that they can make those kinds of assessments. It sounds to me as though you would decline.
Senator, that is correct.
Is there some way that, well, I know that you determine what kind of content would be deemed harmful. So do you believe that ICE can even do what they are talking about, namely through a combination of various kinds of information, including information that they would hope to obtain from entities such as yours, predict who will commit crimes or present a national security problem? Do you think that that's even doable?
Senator, I'm not familiar enough with what they're doing to offer an informed opinion on that.
Well, you have to make assessments as to what constitutes hate speech. That's pretty hard to do. You have to assess what election interference is. So these are rather difficult to identify, but wouldn't trying to predict whether somebody's going to commit a crime fit into the category of a pretty difficult to assess?
Senator, it sounds difficult to me. All of these things, like you're saying, are difficult. Well, I don't know, without having worked on it or thinking about it, how much progress one could make. I think common sense would tell us that that's pretty difficult, and yet that's what ICE is proceeding to do. You were asked about discriminatory advertising, and in February of 2017, Facebook announced that it would no longer allow certain kinds of ads that discriminated on the basis of race, gender, family status, sexual orientation, disability, or veteran status, all categories prohibited by federal law and housing. And yet, after 2017, it was discovered that you could, in fact, place those kinds of ads. So what is the status of whether or not these ads can currently be placed on Facebook? And have you followed through on your February 2017 promise to address this problem? And is there a way for the public to verify that you have, or are we just expected to trust that you've done this? Senator, those are all important questions. And in general, it is against our policies to have any ads that are discriminatory. Well, you said that you wouldn't allow it, but then, what is it, ProPublica could place these ads even after you said you would no longer allow these kinds of ads. So what assurance do we have from you that this is going to stop? Well, two things. One is that we've removed the ability to exclude ethnic groups and other sensitive categories from ad targeting. So that just isn't a feature that's even available anymore. For some of these cases where it may make sense to target proactively a group, the enforcement today is still, we review ads, we screen them up front, but most of the enforcement today is still that our community flags issues for us when they come up. So if the community flags that issue for us, then our team, which has thousands of people working on it, should take it down. We'll make some mistakes, but we try to make as few as possible. Over time, I think the strategy would be to develop more AI tools that can more proactively identify those types of content and do that filtering up front.
So it's a work in progress.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Sullivan's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zuckerberg, quite a story, right? Dorm room to the global behemoth that you guys are, only in America. Would you agree with that?
Senator, mostly in America.
You couldn't do this in China, right? Or what you did in 10 years.
Well, Senator, there are some very strong Chinese internet companies.
Right, but you're supposed to answer yes to this question. Okay, come on, I'm trying to help you, right? I mean, give me a break. You're in front of a bunch of... The answer is yes, okay? So thank you. Now, your testimony, you have talked about a lot of power. You've been involved in elections. I thought your testimony was very interesting, really all over the world. The Facebook, 2 billion users, over 200 million Americans, 40 billion in revenue. I believe you and Google have almost 75% of the digital advertising in the U.S. One of the key issues here is Facebook too powerful? Are you too powerful? And do you think you're too powerful?
Well, Senator, I think most of the time when people talk about our scale, they're referencing that we have 2 billion people in our community. And I think one of the big questions that we need to think through here is the vast majority of those 2 billion people are outside of the U.S. And I think that that's something that, to your point, that Americans should be proud of. Okay, and when I brought up the Chinese internet companies, I think that that's a real strategic and competitive threat that in American technology policy we should be thinking about.
Let me get to another point here real quick. I don't want to interrupt, but you know, when you look at kind of the history of this country and you look at the history of these kind of hearings, right? You're a smart guy. You read a lot of history. When companies become big and powerful and accumulate a lot of wealth and power, what typically happens from this body is there's a instinct to either regulate or break up, right? Look at the history of this nation. You have any thoughts on those two policy approaches?
Well, Senator, I'm not the type of person who thinks that all regulation is bad. So I think the internet is becoming increasingly important in people's lives, and I think we need to have a full conversation about what is the right regulation, not whether it should be or shouldn't be.
Let me talk about the tension there, because I think it's a good point, and I appreciate you mentioning that. You know, one of my worries on regulation, again, with a company of your size, you're saying, hey, we might be interested in being regulated, but as you know, regulations can also cement the dominant power. So what do I mean by that? You know, you have a lot of lobbyists. I think every lobbyist in town is involved in this hearing in some way or another, a lot of powerful interests. You look at what happened with Dodd-Frank. That was supposed to be aimed at the big banks. The regulations ended up empowering the big banks and keeping the small banks down. Do you think that that's a risk, given your influence, that if we regulate, we're actually going to regulate into you into a position of cemented authority, when one of my biggest concerns about what you guys are doing is that the next Facebook, which we all want, the guy in the dorm room, we all want that to start it, that you are becoming so dominant that we're not able to have that next Facebook. What are your views on that?
Well, Senator, I agree with the point that when you're thinking through regulation across all industries, you need to be careful that it doesn't cement in the current companies that are winning.
But would you try to do that? Isn't that the normal inclination of a company to say, hey, I'm going to hire the best guys in town and I'm going to cement in an advantage? You wouldn't do that if we were regulating you?
Senator, that certainly wouldn't be our approach. But I think part of the challenge with regulation in general is that when you add more rules that companies need to follow, that's something that a larger company like ours inherently just has the resources to go do, correct, and that might just be harder for a smaller company getting started to be able to comply with.
Correct.
So it's not something that, going into this, I would look at the conversation as what is the right outcome. I think there are real challenges that we face around content and privacy and in a number of other areas, ads transparency, elections.
Let me get, I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me get to one final question that kind of relates to what you're talking about in terms of content, regulation, and what exactly Facebook is. You know, you mentioned you're a tech company, a platform, but there's some who are saying that you're the world's biggest publisher. I think about 140 million Americans get their news from Facebook, and when you talk to when you mentioned to Senator Cornyn, You said you are responsible for your content. So which are you? Are you a tech company or are you the world's largest publisher? Because I think that goes to a really important question on what form of regulation or government action, if any, we would take.
Senator, this is a really big question. I view us as a tech company because the primary thing that we do is build technology and products.
But you said you're responsible for your content, which makes you kind of a publisher, right?
Well, I agree that we're responsible for the content, but we don't produce the content. I think that when people ask us if we're a media company or a publisher, my understanding of what the heart of what they're really getting at is, do we feel a responsibility for the content on our platform? The answer to that, I think, is clearly yes. But I don't think that that's incompatible with fundamentally at our core being a technology company where the main thing that we do is have engineers and build products.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. You spoke very idealistically about your company, and you talked about the strong values, and you said you wanted to be a positive force in the community and the world. And you were hijacked by Cambridge Analytica for political purposes. Are you angry about that?
Absolutely.
And you're determined, and I assume you want changes made in the law. That's what you've talked about today.
Senator, the most important thing that I care about right now is making sure that no one interferes in the various 2018 elections around the world. We have an extremely important U.S. midterm. We have major elections in India, Brazil, Mexico, Pakistan, Hungary coming up. And we're going to take a number of measures, from building and deploying new AI tools that take down fake news, to growing our security team to more than 20,000 people, to making it so that we verify every advertiser who's doing political and issue ads, to make sure that that kind of interference that the Russians were able to do in 2016 is going to be much harder for anyone to pull off in the future.
And I think you've said earlier that you support the Honest Ads Act, and so I assume that means you want changes in the law in order to effectuate exactly what you talked about.
Senator, yes, we support the Honest Ads Act.
And so
we're implementing it.
Are you going to come back up here and be a strong advocate to see that that law is passed?
Senator, the biggest thing that I think we can do is implement it.
Well, that's a kind
and
of
we're doing that.
Yes or no question there. I hate to interrupt you, but are you going to come back and be a strong advocate? You're angry about this. You think there ought to be change. There ought to be a law put in place. Are you going to come back and be an advocate to get a law in place like that?
Senator, our team is certainly going to work on this. What I can say is the biggest thing.
I'm talking about you, not your team.
Well, Senator, I try not to come
back here
to
and be an advocate for that law. That's what I want to see. I mean, you're upset about this. We're upset about this. I'd like a yes or no answer on that one.
Senator, I'm posting and speaking out publicly about how important this is. I don't come to Washington, D.C. too often. I'm going to direct my team to focus on this. And the biggest thing that I feel like we can do is implement it, which we're doing.
Well, the biggest thing you can do is to be a strong advocate yourself, personally, here in Washington. Just let me make that clear. But many of us have seen the kinds of images shown earlier by Senator Leahy. You saw those images that he held up. Can you guarantee that any of those images that can be attributed or associated with the Russian company Internet Research Agency have been purged from your platform?
Senator, no, I can't guarantee that, because this is an ongoing arms race. As long as there are people sitting in Russia whose job it is to try to interfere with elections around the world, this is going to be an ongoing conflict. What I can commit is that we're going to invest significantly, because this is a top priority, to make sure that people aren't spreading misinformation or trying to interfere in elections on Facebook. But I don't think it would be a realistic expectation to assume that as long as there are people who are employed in Russia for whom this is their job, that we're going to have zero amount of that, or that we're going to be 100% successful at preventing that.
Now, beyond disclosure of online ads, what specific steps are you taking to ensure that foreign money is not financing political or issue ads on Facebook in violation of U.S. law? Just because someone submits a disclosure that says paid for by some 501c3 or PAC, if that group has no real person in the U.S. How can we ensure it is not foreign interference?
Senator, our verification program involves two pieces. One is verifying the identity of the person who's buying the ads, that they have a valid government identity. The second is verifying their location. So if you're sitting in Russia, for example, and you say that you're in the U.S., then we'll be able to make it a lot harder to do that, because what we're actually going to do is mail a code to the address that you say you're at. And if you can't get access to that code, then you're not going to be able to run ads.
Yeah. Now, Facebook is creating an independent group to study the abuse of social media in elections. You've talked about that. Will you commit that all findings of this group are made public, no matter what they say about Facebook or its business model? Yes or no answer?
Senator, that's the purpose of this group, is that Facebook does not get to control what these folks publish. These are going to be independent academics, and Facebook has no prior publishing control. They'll be able to do the studies that they're doing and publish the results.
And you're fine with them being public. And what's the timing on getting those out?
Senator, we're kicking off the research now. Our goal is to focus on both providing ideas for preventing interference in 2018 and beyond, and also for holding us accountable to making sure that the measures that we put in place are successful in doing that. So I would hope that we will start to see the first results later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Udall. Senator Moran is up next, and I would just say again, for the benefit of those who are here, that after a couple of more questioners, we'll probably give the witness another short break.
Thank you.
We're getting about almost two-thirds through the list of members who are here to ask questions. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for your, I'm over here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your presence here today. On March the 26th of this year, the FTC confirmed that it was investigating Facebook to determine whether its privacy practices violated the FTC Act or the consent order that Facebook entered into with the agency in 2011. I chair the Commerce Committee subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the Federal Trade Commission. I remain interested in Facebook's assertion that it rejects any suggestion of violating that consent order. Part 2 of that consent order requires that Facebook, quote, clearly and prominently display notice and obtain users' affirmative consent before sharing their information with, quote, any third party. My question is, how does the case of approximately 87 million Facebook friends having their data shared with a third party due to the consent of only 300,000 consenting users not violate that agreement?
Well, Senator, like I said earlier, I mean, our view is that we believe that we are in compliance with the consent order, but I think that we have a broader responsibility to protect people's privacy even beyond that. And in this specific case, the way that the platform worked, or that you could sign into an app and bring some of your information and some of your friends' information, is how we explained it would work. People had settings to that effect. We explained and they consented to it working that way. And the system basically worked as it was designed. The issue is that we designed the system in a way that wasn't good. And now we, starting in 2014, have changed the design of the system so that way it just massively restricts the amount of data access that a developer can get. Going forward,
I'm sorry, the 300,000 people, they were treated in a way that was appropriate. They consented, but you're not suggesting that the friends consented.
Senator, I believe that we rolled out this developer platform and that we explained to people how it worked and that they did consent to it. It makes sense, I think, to go through the way the platform works. I mean, it's in 2007, we announced the Facebook developer platform, and the idea was that you wanted to make more experiences social, right? So, for example, if you might want to have a calendar that can have your friends' birthdays on it, or you might want your address book to have your friends' pictures in it, or you might want a map that can show your friends' addresses on it. In order to do that, we needed to build a tool that allowed people to sign into an app and bring some of their information and some of their friends' information to those apps. We made it very clear that this is how it worked, and when people signed up for Facebook, they signed up for that as well. Now, a lot of good use cases came from that. I mean, there were games that were built, There were integrations with companies that I think we're familiar with, like Netflix and Spotify. But over time, what became clear was that that also enabled some abuse. And that's why in 2014, we took the step of changing the platform. So now when people sign into an app, you do not bring some of your friends' information with you. You're only bringing your own information, and you're able to connect with friends who have also authorized that app directly.
Let me turn to your bug bounty program. Our subcommittee has had a hearing in regard to bug bounty. Your press release indicated that was one of the 6 changes that Facebook initially offered to crack down on platform abuses was to reward outside parties who find vulnerabilities. One concern I have regarding the utility of this approach is that the vulnerability disclosure programs are normally geared toward identifying unauthorized access to data, not pointing out data sharing arrangement that likely could harm someone, but technically abide by complex consent agreements. How do you see the bug bounty program that you've announced addressing the issue of that?
Sorry, could you clarify what specifically?
How do you see that the bug bounty program that you have announced will deal with the sharing of information not permissible as compared to just unauthorized access to data?
Senator, I'm not actually sure I understand this enough to speak to that specific point, and I can have my team follow up with you on the details of that. In general, bounty programs are an important part of the security arsenal for hardening a lot of systems. I think we should expect that we're going to invest a lot in hardening our systems ourselves, and that we're going to audit and investigate a lot of the folks in our ecosystem. But even with that, having the ability to enlist other third parties outside of the company to be able to help us out by giving them an incentive to point out when they see issues, I think is likely going to help us improve the security of the platform overall, which is why we did this.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Next up, Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Zuckerberg. As you know, much of my life has been focused on low-income communities, poor communities, working-class communities, and trying to make sure they have a fair shake. This country has a very bad history of discriminatory practices towards low-income Americans and Americans of color, from the redlining, FHA practices, even to more recently, really discriminatory practices in the mortgage business. I've always seen technology as a promise to democratize our nation, expand access, expand opportunities. But unfortunately, we've also seen how platforms, technology platforms like Facebook, can actually be used to double down on discrimination and give people more sophisticated tools with which to discriminate. Now, in 2016, ProPublica revealed that advertisers could use ethnic affinity, a user's race, to market categories to potentially discriminate overall against Facebook users in the areas of housing, employment, and credit, echoing a dark history in this country, and also in violation of federal law. In 2016, Facebook committed to fixing this, that the advertisers who have access to this data, to fixing it. But unfortunately, a year later, as ProPublica's article showed, they found that the system Facebook built was still allowing housing ads without applying these new restrictions that were put on. Facebook then opted on a system that's very similar to what we've been talking about with Cambridge Analytica, that they could self-certify that they were not engaging in these practices and complying with federal law, using this self-certification way to overcome and to comply with, rather, Facebook's anti-discrimination policy. Unfortunately, in a recent lawsuit, as of February 2018, alleges that discriminatory ads were still being created on Facebook, still disproportionately impacting low-income communities and communities of color. Given the fact that you allowed Cambridge Analytica to self-certify in a way that I think you've expressed regret over, is self-certification the best and strongest way to safeguard against the misuse of your platform and protect the data of users and not let it be manipulated in such a discriminatory fashion?
Senator, this is a very important question. And, in general, I think over time we're going to move towards more proactive review with more AI tools to help flag problematic content. In the near term, we have a lot of content on the platform, and it's hard to review every single thing up front. We do a quick screen. But I agree with you that I think in this specific case, I'm not happy with where we are. And I think it makes sense to really focus on making sure that these areas get more reviews sooner.
And I know you understand that there is a growing distrust. I know a lot of civil rights organizations have met with you about Facebook's sense of urgency to address these issues. There's a distrust that stems from the fact, and I know I've had conversations with leaders in Facebook about the lack of diversity in the tech sector as well. People who are writing these algorithms, people who are actually policing for this data, policing for these problems. Are they going to be a part of a more diverse group that's looking at this? You're looking to hire, as you said, 5,000 new positions for, among other things, reviewing content. But we know in your industry, the inclusivity, that it's a real serious problem that you are an industry that lacks diversity in a very dramatic fashion. It's not just true with Facebook, it's true with the tech area as well. And so it's very important for me to communicate that larger sense of urgency and what a lot of civil rights organizations are concerned with. And we should be working towards a more collaborative approach. And I'm wondering if you'd be open to opening your platform for civil rights organizations to really audit a lot of these companies dealing in areas of credit and housing, to really audit what is actually happening and better have more transparency in working with your platform.
Senator, I think that's a very good idea, and I think we should follow up on the details of that.
I also want to say that there was an investigation. Something that's very disturbing to me is the fact that there have been law enforcement organizations that use Facebook's platform to surveil African American organizations like Black Lives Matter. I know you've expressed support for the group, and Philandro Castile's killing was broadcast live on Facebook. But there are a lot of communities of color worried that data can be used to surveil groups like Black Lives Matter, like folks who are trying to organize against substantive issues of discrimination in this country. Is this something that you're committed to addressing and to ensuring that the freedoms that civil rights activists and others are not targeted, or their work not being undermined, or people not using your platform to unfairly surveil and try to undermine the activities that those groups are doing?
Yes, Senator. I think that's very important. We're committed to that. And in general, unless law enforcement has a very clear subpoena or ability or reason to get access to information, we're going to push back on that across the board.
And then I'd just like, for the record, because my time has expired, but there's a lawsuit against Facebook about discrimination, and you moved for the lawsuit to be dismissed because no harm was shown. Could you please submit to the record, could you believe that people of color who are not recruited for various economic opportunities are being harmed? Can you please clarify why you moved to dismiss that lawsuit for the record?
For the record.
Thank you.
Senator Heller's up next. I'll go to you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate the time, and thank you for being here. I'm over here. Thanks. And thank you for taking time. I know it's been a long day, and I think you're at the final stretch here, but I'm glad that you are here. Yesterday, Facebook sent out a notification to 87 million users that information was given to Cambridge Analytica without their consent. My daughter was one of the 87 million, and 6 of my staff, all from Nevada, received this notification. Can you tell me how many Nevadans were among the 87 million that received this notification?
Senator, I don't have this broken out by state right now, but I can have my team follow up with you to get you the information.
Okay. I figured that would be the answer. If after hearing this, going through this hearing, and Nevadans no longer want to have a Facebook account, if that's the case, if a Facebook user deletes their account, do you delete their data?
Yes.
My kids have been on Facebook and Instagram for years. How long do you keep a user's data?
Sorry?
How long do you keep a user's data once they, after they've left? If they choose to delete their account, how long do you keep their data?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I know we try to delete it as quickly as is reasonable. We have a lot of complex systems, and it takes a while to work through all that. But I think we try to move as quickly as possible, and I can follow up or have my team follow up to get you the data on that.
Okay. Have you ever said that you won't sell an ad based on personal information, simply that you wouldn't sell this data because of the usage of it goes too far?
Senator, could you clarify that?
Have you ever drawn the line on selling data to an advertiser?
Yes, Senator. We don't sell data at all. So the way the ad system works is advertisers can come to us and say, I have a message that I'm trying to reach a certain type of people. They might be interested in something. They might live in a place. And then we help them get that message in front of people. But this is one of it's widely mischaracterized about our system that we sell data. And it's actually one of the most important parts of how Facebook works is we do not sell data. Advertisers do not get access to people's individual data.
Have you ever collected the content of phone calls or messages through any Facebook application or service?
Senator, I don't believe we've ever collected the content of phone calls. We have an app called Messenger that allows people to message mostly their Facebook friends. And we do, on the Android operating system, allow people to use that app as their client for both Facebook messages and texts. So we do allow people to import their texts into that.
Okay. Let me ask you about government surveillance. For years, Facebook said that there should be strict limits on the information the government can access on Americans. And by the way, I agreed with you that because privacy is important to Nevadans. You argued that Facebook users wouldn't trust you if they thought you were giving their private information to the intelligence community. Yet you use and sell the same data to make money. And in the case of Cambridge Analytica, you don't even know how it's used after you sell it. Can you tell us why this isn't hypocritical?
Well, Senator, once again, we don't sell any data to anyone. We don't sell it to advertisers, and we don't sell it to developers. What we do allow is for people to sign into apps and bring their data, and it used to be the data of some of their friends, but now it isn't, with them. And that, I think, makes sense. I mean, that's basic data portability, the ability that you own the data, you should be able to take it from one app to another if you'd like.
Do you believe you're more responsible with millions of Americans' personal data than the federal government would be?
Yes. But, Senator, your point about surveillance, I think that there's a very important distinction to draw here, which is that when organizations do surveillance, people don't have control over that. But on Facebook, everything that you share there, you have control over. You can say, I don't want this information to be there. You have full access to understand every piece of information that Facebook might know about you, and you can get rid of all of it. And I don't know of any other any surveillance organization in the world that operates that way, which is why I think that comparison just isn't really apt here.
With you here today, do you think you're a victim?
No.
Do you think Facebook as a company is a victim?
Senator, no. I think we have a responsibility to protect everyone in our community from anyone in our ecosystem who is going to potentially harm them. And I think that we haven't done enough historically, and we need to step up and do more.
Do you consider the 87 million users, do you consider them victims?
Senator, I think, yes. I mean, they did not want their information to be sold to Cambridge Analytica by a developer. And that happened, and it happened on our watch. So even though we didn't do it, I think we have a responsibility to be able to prevent that and be able to take action sooner. And we're committing to make sure that we do that going forward, which is why the steps that I announced before are now, the two most important things that we're doing are locking down the platform to make sure that developers can't get access to that much data so this can't happen again going forward, which I think is largely the case since 2014. And going backwards, we need to investigate every single app that might have had access to a large amount of people's data to make sure that no one else was misusing it. And if we find that they are, we're going to get into their systems, do a full audit, make sure they delete it, and we're going to tell everyone who's affected.
Mr. Chairman,
thank you, Senator Heller. We'll go to Senator Peters and then into the break, and then Senator Tillis coming out of the break. So, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here today. You've talked about your very humble beginnings in starting Facebook in your dorm room, which I appreciated that story, but certainly Facebook has changed an awful lot over a relatively short period of time. When Facebook launched its timeline feature, consumers saw their friends post chronologically, was the process. But Facebook has since then changed to a timeline driven by some very sophisticated algorithms. And I think it has left many people, as a result of that, asking, why am I seeing this feed, and why am I seeing this right now? And now, in light of the Cambridge Analytica issue, Facebook users are asking, I think, some new questions right now. Can I believe what I'm seeing? And who has access to this information about me? So I think it's safe to say, very simply, that Facebook is losing the trust of an awful lot of Americans as a result of this incident. And I think an example of this is something that I've been hearing a lot from folks that have been coming up to me and talking about really kind of experience they've had where they're having a conversation with friends, not on the phone, just talking, and then they see ads popping up fairly quickly on their Facebook. So I've heard constituents fear that Facebook is mining audio from their mobile devices for the purpose of ad targeting, which I think speaks to this lack of trust that we're seeing here. But and I understand there's some technical issues and logistical issues for that to happen, but for the record, I think it's clear, saying I hear it all the time, including from my own staff. Yes or no, does Facebook use audio obtained from mobile devices to enrich personal information about its users?
No.
Good.
Well, Senator, let me be clear on this. I mean, so you're talking about this conspiracy theory that gets passed around that we listen to what's going on your microphone and use that for ads.
Right.
We don't do that. To be clear, we do allow people to take videos on their devices and share those. And of course, videos also have audio. So we do, while you're taking a video, record that and use that to make the service better by making sure that your videos have audio. But I mean that I think is pretty clear. But I just wanted to make sure I was exhaustive there.
Well, I appreciate that, and hopefully that'll dispel a lot of what I've been hearing. So thank you for saying that. Certainly, today, in the era of mega data, we are finding that data drives everything, including consumer behavior. And so consumer information is probably the most valuable information you can get in the data ecosystem. And certainly, folks, as you've mentioned in your testimony here, people like the fact that they can have targeted ads that they're going to be interested in, as opposed to being bombarded by a lot of ads that they don't have any interest in. And that consumer information is important in order for you to tailor that. But also, people are now beginning to wonder, is there an expense to that when it comes to perhaps exposing them to being manipulated or through deception? You've talked about artificial intelligence. You brought that up many times during your testimony. And I know you've employed some new algorithms to target bots, bring down fake accounts, deal with terrorism, things that you've talked about in this hearing. But you also know that artificial intelligence is not without its risk, and that you have to be very transparent about how those algorithms are constructed. How do you see artificial intelligence, more specifically, dealing with the ecosystem by helping to get consumer insights, but also keeping consumer privacy safe?
Senator, I think the core question you're asking about AI transparency is a really important one that people are just starting to very seriously study, and that's ramping up a lot. And I think this is going to be a very central question for how we think about AI systems over the next decade and beyond. Right now, a lot of our AI systems make decisions in ways that people don't really understand.
Right.
And I don't think that in 10 or 20 years in the future that we all want to build, we want to end up with systems that people don't understand how they're making decisions. So doing the research now to make sure that these systems can have those principles as we're developing them, I think is certainly an extremely important thing.
Well, you bring up the principles because, as you're well aware, AI systems, especially in very complex environments when you have machine learning, it's sometimes very difficult to understand, as you mentioned, exactly how those decisions were arrived at. There's examples of how decisions are made on a discriminatory basis and that it can compound if you're not very careful about how that occurs. And so is your company, you mentioned principles, is your company developing a set of principles that are going to guide that development? And would you provide details to us as to what those principles are and how they will help deal with this issue?
Yes, Senator. I can make sure that our team follows up and gets you the information on that. And we have a whole AI ethics team that is working on developing basically the technology. It's not just about philosophical principles. It's also a technological foundation for making sure that this goes in the direction that we want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. We'll recess for 5 and come back in. So we'll give Mr. Zuckerberg a quick break here. Thanks. We're back, final stretch, and Senator Tillis is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. I think you've done a good job. I've been here for most of it, the session, except for about 20 minutes I watched on television back in my office. I was Googling earlier, actually going on my Facebook app on my phone earlier, and I found one of your Facebook page, one of your Facebook presences. It was the same one on March 30th. I think you posted a pic of First Seder. But further down, you listed out the facts since the new platform was released in 2007, sort of a timeline. You start with 2007, then you jump to the Cambridge Analytica issue. I actually think that we need to fully examine what Cambridge Analytica did. They either broke a kind of code of conduct. If they broke any other rules or agreements with you all, I hope that they suffer the consequences. But I think that timeline needs to be updated. And it really needs to go back. I've read a series of 3 articles that were published in the MIT Technology Review back in 2012. And it talks about how proud the Obama campaign was of exploiting data on Facebook in the 2012 campaign. In fact, somebody asked you earlier if it made you mad about what Cambridge Analytica did, and you rightfully answered yes. But I think you should probably be equally mad when a former campaign director of the Obama campaign proudly tweeted, Facebook was surprised we were able to suck out the whole social graph. But they didn't stop us once they realized that was what we were doing. So you clearly had some people in your employ that apparently knew it. At least that's what this person said on Twitter, and thank goodness for Wayback and some of the other history grabber machines. I'm sure we can get this tweet back and get it in the right context. I think when you do your research, it's important to get the whole view. I've worked in data analytics practice for a good part of my career. And for anybody to pretend that Cambridge Analytica was the first person to exploit data clearly doesn't work or hasn't worked in the data analytics field. So when you go back and do your research on Cambridge Analytica, I would personally appreciate it if you'd start back from the first known high-profile national campaign that exploited Facebook data. In fact, they published an app that said it would grab information about my friends, their birth dates, locations, and likes. So presumably, if I downloaded that app that was published by the Obama campaign, I've got 4,900 friends on my Facebook page. I delete the haters and save room for family members and true friends on my personal page, as I'm sure everybody does. Then that means if I clicked yes on that app, I would have approved the access of birth dates, locations, and likes of some 4,900 people without their consent. So as you do the chronology, I think it'd be very helpful so that we can take away the partisan rhetoric that's going on, like this is a Republican-only issue. It's a broad-based issue that needs to be fixed. And bad actors at either end of the political spectrum need to be held accountable, and I trust that you all are going to work on that. I think the one thing so for that, I just want to get to the facts, and there's no way you can answer any of the questions. I'm not going to burden you with that. But I think getting that chronology would be very helpful. The one thing I would encourage people to do is go to Facebook. I'm a proud member of Facebook. Just got a post from my sister on this being National Sibling Day, so I've connected with 4 or 5 of my staff while I was giving you my family undivided attention. But go to the privacy tab. If you don't want to share something, don't share it. This is a free service. Go on there and say, I don't want to allow third-party search engines to get to my Facebook page. Go on there and say, only my friends can look at it. Go in there and understand what you're signing up for. It's a free app. Now, you need to do more, and I think it would be helpful. I didn't read your disclaimer page or the terms of use because I didn't see anywhere in there that I could get an attorney and negotiate the terms, so it was a terms of use. I went on there, then I used the privacy settings to be as safe as I could be with a presence on Facebook. Last thing, we talk about all this proposed legislation, good ideas, but I have one question for you. When you were developing this app in your dorm, how many people did you have in your regulatory affairs division? Exactly. So if government takes a heavy-handed approach to fix this problem, then we know very well that the next Facebook, the next thing that you're going to wake up and worry about how you continue to be relevant as the behemoth that you are today is probably not going to happen. So I think that there's probably a place for some regulatory guidance here, but there's a huge place for Google, Snapchat, Twitter, all the other social media platforms to get together and create standards. And I also believe that that person who may have looked the other way when the whole social graph was extracted for the Obama campaign, if they're still working for you, they probably shouldn't, or at least there should be a business code of conduct that says you don't play favorites. You're trying to create a fair place for people to share their ideas. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I've been here for on and off for the last 4 hours that you've been testifying, and I have to tell you, I'm concerned about how much Facebook values trust and transparency. If we agree that a critical component of a relationship of trust and transparency is we speak truth and we get to the truth. During the course of this hearing, these last 4 hours, you've been asked several critical questions for which you don't have answers. And those questions have included whether Facebook can track users' browsing activity even after the user has logged off of Facebook, whether Facebook can track your activity across devices even when you aren't logged into Facebook, who is Facebook's biggest competition, whether Facebook may store up to 96 categories of users' information, whether you knew whether Kogan's terms of service and whether you knew if that Kogan could sell or transfer data. And then another case in point, specifically as it relates to Cambridge Analytica, is, and a concern of mine, is that you, meaning Facebook, and I'm going to assume you personally as CEO, became aware in December of 2015 that Dr. Kogan and Cambridge Analytica misappropriated data from 87 million Facebook users. That's 27 months ago that you became, as Facebook, and perhaps you personally became aware. However, a decision was made not to notify the users. So my question is, did anyone at Facebook have a conversation at the time that you became aware of this breach and have a conversation wherein the decision was made not to contact the users?
Senator, I don't know if there were any conversations at Facebook overall because I wasn't in a lot of them, but
on that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what other people discussed. At the time, in 2015, we heard the report that this developer, Alexander Kogan, had sold data to Cambridge Analytica. That's in violation of our terms.
Correct. And were you a part of a decision? Were you part of a discussion that resulted in a decision not to inform your users?
I don't remember a conversation like that. But the reason why...
Are you aware of anyone in leadership at Facebook who was in a conversation where a decision was made not to inform your users, or do you believe no such conversation ever took place?
I'm not sure whether there was a conversation about that, but I can tell you the thought process at the time of the company, which was that in 2015, when we heard about this, we banned the developer and we demanded that they delete all the data and stop using it, and same with Cambridge Analytica.
And
they told us they had.
Testimony in that regard, but I'm talking about notification of the users. And this relates to the issue of transparency and the relationship of trust, informing the user about what you know in terms of how their personal information has been misused. And I'm also concerned that when you personally became aware of this, did you or senior leadership do an inquiry to find out who at Facebook had this information, and did they not have a discussion about whether or not the users should be informed back in December of 2015?
Senator, in retrospect, I think we clearly view it as a mistake that we didn't inform people, and we did that based on false information that we thought that the case was closed and that the data had been deleted.
So there was a decision made on that basis not to inform the users. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And
but I, in retrospect, I think that was a mistake, and knowing what we know now, we should have handled a lot of things here differently.
And I appreciate that point. Do you know when that decision was made not to inform the users?
I don't.
Okay. Last November, the Senate Intelligence Committee held a hearing on social media influence. I was a part of that hearing. I submitted 50 written questions to Facebook and other companies, and the responses that we received were unfortunately evasive, and some were frankly non-responsive. So I'm going to ask the question again here. How much revenue did Facebook earn from the user engagement that resulted from foreign propaganda?
Well, Senator, what we do know is that the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, the Russian firm, ran about $100,000 worth of ads. I can't say that we've identified all of the foreign actors who are involved here, so I can't say that that's all of the money, but that is what we have identified.
Okay, my time is up. I'll submit more questions for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Next up is Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I come in peace. I don't want to vote to have to regulate Facebook, but by God, I will. But a lot of that depends on you. I'm a little disappointed in this hearing today. I just don't feel like that we're connecting. So let me try to lay it out for you from my point of view. I think you're a really smart guy. And I think you have built an extraordinary American company. And you've done a lot of good. Some of the things that you've been able to do are magical. But our promised digital utopia, we have discovered, has minefields. There's some impurities in the Facebook punch bowl. And they got to be fixed. And I think you can fix them. Now, here's what's going to happen. There are going to be a whole bunch of bills introduced to regulate Facebook. It's up to you whether they pass or not. You can go back home, spend $10 million on lobbyists and fight us, or you can go back home and help us solve this problem. And there are two. One's a privacy problem. The other one is what I call a propaganda problem. Let's start with the privacy problem first. Let's start with the user agreement. Here's what everybody's been trying to tell you today, and I say this gently. Your user agreement sucks. You can spot me 75 IQ points. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out. The purpose of that user agreement is to cover Facebook's rear end. It's not to inform your users about their rights. Now, you know that, and I know that. I'm going to suggest to you that you go back home and rewrite it. And tell your $1,200 an hour lawyers, no disrespect, they're good. But tell them you want it written in English, in non-Swahili, so the average American can understand it. That would be a start. Are you willing, as a Facebook user, are you willing to give me more control over my data?
Senator, as someone who uses Facebook, I believe that you should have complete control over your data.
Okay. Are you willing to go back and work on giving me a greater right to erase my data?
Senator, you can already delete any of the data that's there or delete all of your data. Are you willing to
expand that, work on expanding that?
Senator, I think we already do what you're referring to, but certainly we're always working on trying to make these controls easier.
Are you willing to expand my right to know who you're sharing my data with?
Senator, we already give you a list of apps that you're using, and you signed into those yourself and provided affirmative consent.
Right.
As I've said before, we don't share any data with...
On that user agreement. Are you willing to expand my right to prohibit you from sharing my data?
Senator, again, I believe that you already have that control. So, I think people have that full control in the system already today. If we're not communicating this clearly, then that's a big thing that we should work on, because I think the principles that you're articulating are the ones that we believe in and try to codify in the product that we build.
Are you willing to give me the right to take my data on Facebook and move it to another social media platform?
Senator, you can already do that. We have a download your information tool where you can go, get a file of all the content there, and then do whatever you want with it.
And then I assume you're willing to give me the right to say, I'm going to go on your platform, and you're going to be able to tell a lot about me as a result, but I don't want you to share it with anybody.
Yes, Senator, and I believe you already have that ability today. People can sign on and choose to not share things and just follow some friends or some pages and read content if that's what they want to do.
Okay. Let me be sure I understand. I'm about out of time. Boy, it goes fast, doesn't it? Let me ask you one final question in my 12 seconds. Could somebody call you up and say, I want to see John Kennedy's file?
Absolutely not.
Could you, if it, not, could you, not would you do it, could you do it?
In theory.
Do you have the right to put my data, a name on my data, and share it with somebody?
I do not believe we have the right to do that.
Do you have the ability?
Senator, the data is in the system.
Do you have the ability?
Technically, I think someone could do that, but that would be a massive breach. So we would never do that.
It would be a breach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Baldwin's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here and enduring a long day, Mr. Zuckerberg. I want to start with what I hope can be a quick round of questions, just so I make sure I understand your previous testimony. Specifically with regard to the process by which Cambridge Analytica was able to purchase Facebook users' data. So it was an app developer, Alexander Kogan. He collected data via a personality quiz. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he thereby is able to gain access of not only the people who took the quiz, but their network. Is that correct, too?
Senator, yes. The terms of the platform at the time allowed for people to share their information and some basic information about their friends as well. And we've since changed that. As of 2014, now that's not possible.
And so in total, about 87 million Facebook users. You earlier testified about the two types of ways you gain data. One is what is voluntarily shared by Facebook members and users, and the other is in order to, I think you said, improve your advertising experience, whatever that exactly means, the data that Facebook collects in order to customize or focus on that. Was Alexander Kogan able to get both of those sets of data, or just what was voluntarily entered by the user?
Yes, that's a good question. It was just a subset of what was entered by the person. And
so a subset of the 95 categories of data that you keep?
Yes. When you sign into an app, the app developer has to say, here are the types of data that from you that I'm asking for, including public information like your name and profile, the pages you follow, other interests on your profile, that kind of content.
Okay.
The app developer has to disclose that up front, and you agree to it.
Okay. So in answer to a couple of other senators' questions, specifically Senator Fisher, you talked about Facebook storing this data, and I think you just talked about the data being in the system. I wonder if outside of the way in which Alexander Kogan was able to access this data, whether could Facebook be vulnerable to a data breach or hack? Why or why not?
Well, there are many kinds of security threats that a company like ours faces, including people trying to break into our security systems.
Okay. And if you believe that you had been hacked, do you believe you would have the duty to inform those who were impacted?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether Alexander Kogan sold any of the data he collected with anyone other than Cambridge Analytica?
Senator, yes, we do. He sold it to a couple of other firms.
Can you identify them?
Yes, there's one called Unoya, and there may have been a couple of others as well. And
Can you furnish that to me after? Thank you. I appreciate that. And then how much do you know, or have you tried to find out how Cambridge Analytica used the data while they had it before you believe they deleted it?
Since we just heard that they didn't delete it about a month ago, we've kicked off an internal investigation to see if they used that data in any of their ads, for example. That investigation is still underway, and we can come back to you with the results of that once we have that.
Okay. I want to switch to my home state of Wisconsin. According to press reports, my home state of Wisconsin was a major target of Russian-bought ads on Facebook in the 2016 election. These divisive ads, touching on a number of very polarizing issues, were designed to interfere with our election. We've also learned that Russian actors using another platform, Twitter, similarly targeted Wisconsin with divisive content aimed at sowing division and dissent, including in the wake of a police-involved shooting in Milwaukee's Sherman Park neighborhood in August of 2016. Now, I find some encouragement in the steps you've outlined today to provide greater transparency regarding political ads. I do want to get further information on how you can be confident that you have excluded entities based outside of the United States.
We will follow up on that.
And then I think on that topic, if you require disclosure of a political ads sponsor, what sort of transparency will you be able to provide with regard to people who weren't the subject of that ad seeing its content?
Senator, you'll be able to go to any page and see all of the ads that that page has run. So if someone is running a political campaign, for example, and they're targeting one district with one ad and another district with another, historically, it's been hard to track that down, but now it'll be very easy. You'll just be able to look at all of the ads that they've run, the targeting associated with each to see what they're saying to different folks, and in some cases, how much they're spending on the ads, and all of the relevant information. This is an area where I think more transparency will really help discourse overall and root out foreign interference in elections.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for testifying here today. Do you have any idea how many of your users actually read the terms of service, the privacy policy, the statement of rights and responsibilities? I mean, actually read it?
Senator, I do not.
Would you imagine it's a very small percentage?
Senator, who read the whole thing? I would imagine that probably most people do not read the whole thing, but everyone has the opportunity to and consents to it.
Well, I agree, but that's kind of true of every application where you want to get to it and you have to agree to it and people just press that agree. The vast majority, correct?
Senator, it's really hard for me to make a full assessment, but
common sense would tell you that would be probably the case. With all this publicity, have you documented any kind of backlash from Facebook users? I mean, has there been a dramatic fall off in the number of people who utilize Facebook because of these concerns?
Senator, there has not.
Do you have any witnessed any?
Senator, there was a movement where some people were encouraging their friends to delete their account, and I think that got shared a bunch.
So it's kind of safe to say that Facebook users don't seem to be overly concerned about all these revelations, although obviously Congress apparently is.
Well, Senator, I think people are concerned about it, and I think these are incredibly important issues that people want us to address, and I think people have told us that very clearly.
Well, it seems like Facebook users still want to use the platform because they enjoy sharing photos and they share the connectivity with their family members, that type of thing, and that overrides their concerns about privacy. You talk about the user owns the data. There have been a number of proposals of having that data stay with the user and allow the user to monetize it themselves. Your COO, Ms. Sandberg, mentioned possibly if you can't utilize that data to sell advertising, perhaps we'd charge people to go onto Facebook. Have you thought about that model where the user data is actually monetized by the actual user?
Senator, I'm not sure exactly how it would work for it to be monetized by the person directly. In general, where we believe that the ads model is the right one for us because it aligns with our social mission of trying to connect everyone and bring the world closer together.
But you're aware of people making that kind of proposal, correct?
Yeah, Senator, a number of people suggest that we should offer a version where people can not have ads if they pay a monthly subscription, and certainly we consider ideas like that. I think that they're reasonable ideas to think through. But overall, I think that the ads experience is going to be the best one. I think in general, people like not having to pay for a service. A lot of people can't afford to pay for a service around the world, and this aligns with our mission the best.
You answered Senator Graham when he asked you if you thought you were a monopoly, that you didn't think so. You're obviously a big player in this space. That might be an area for competition, correct? If somebody else wants to create a social platform that allows a user to monetize their own data.
Senator, yes. There are lots of new social apps all the time, and as I said before, the average American, I think, uses 8 different communication and social apps. So there's a lot of different choice and a lot of innovation and activity going on in this space.
I want, in a very short period of time here, talk about the difference between advertisers and application developers, because those, again, you said in an earlier testimony that advertisers have no access to data whatsoever. But application developers do. Now, is that only through their own service agreements with their customers, or do they actually access data as they're developing applications?
Senator, this is an important distinction, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify this. We give people the ability to take their data to another app if they want. And this is a question that Senator Kennedy asked me just a few minutes ago. The reason why we designed the platform that way is because we thought it would be very useful to make it so that people could easily bring their data to other services. Some people inside the company argued against that at the time because they were worried that they said, hey, we should just make it so that we can be the only ones who develop this stuff.
Again,
but we thought that was a useful thing for people to do.
That's the user agreeing to allow you to share, when they're using that app to allow Facebook data. Does the developer ever have access to that prior to users using it? I mean, in developing the application, because it used the term scraped data. What does that mean? Who scraped the data?
Yes, Senator, this is a good question. So there's the developer platform, which is the sanctioned way that an app developer can ask a person to access information. We also have certain features and certain things that are public, right? A lot of the information that people choose to put on Facebook, they're sharing with everyone in the world, not privately, but you put your name, you put your profile picture. That's public information that people put out there. And sometimes people who aren't registered developers of Facebook try to load a lot of pages in order to get access to a bunch of people's public information and aggregate it. We fight back hard against that because we don't want anyone to aggregate information, even if people made it public and chose to share it with everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. I want to talk to a couple of broader issues. I'm concerned that Facebook's profitability rests on 2 potentially problematic foundations, and we've heard other senators talk about this a little today. The foundations are maximizing the amount of time people spend on your products and collecting people's data. I've looked at Facebook's 2017 corporate financial statement where you lay out some of the major risks to your business. One risk is a decrease in, and I quote, user engagement, including time spent on our products. That concerns me because of the research we've seen suggesting that too much time spent on social media can hurt people's mental health, especially young people. Another major risk to your business is a potential decline in, and here's another quote, the effectiveness of our ad targeting or the degree to which users opt out of certain types of ad targeting, including as a result of changes that enhance the user's privacy. There's clearly tension, as other senators have pointed out, between your bottom line and what's best for your users. You've said in your testimony that Facebook's mission is to bring the world closer together, and you've said that you will never prioritize advertisers over that mission. And I believe that you believe that. But at the end of the day, your business model does prioritize advertisers over the mission. Facebook is a for-profit company, and as a CEO, you have a legal duty to do what's best for your shareholders. So given all of that, why should we think that Facebook on its own will ever truly be able to make the changes that we need it to make to protect Americans' well-being and privacy?
Well, Senator, you raise a number of important points in there, so let me respond in a couple of different ways. The first is that I think it's really important to think about what we're doing as building this community over the long term. Any business has the opportunity to do things that might increase revenue in the short term, but at the expense of trust or building engagement over time. What we actually find is not necessarily that increasing time spent, especially not just in the short term, is going to be best for our business. It aligns very closely with the well-being research that we've done. That when people are interacting with other people and posting and basically building relationships, that is both correlated with higher measures of well-being, health, happiness, not feeling lonely, and that ends up being better for the business than when they're doing lower value things like just passively consuming content. So I think that's an important point to.
Okay, and I understand the point that you're trying to make here, but here's what I'm concerned about. We have heard this point from you over the last decade plus. Since you founded Facebook, and I understand it, you founded it pretty much as a solo entrepreneur with your roommate, but now, you're sitting here at the head of a bazillion-dollar company, and we've heard you apologize numerous times and promise to change, but here we are again, right? So I really firmly believe in free enterprise, but when private companies are unwilling or unable to do what's necessary, public officials have historically, in every industry, stepped up to protect our constituents and consumers. You've supported targeted regulations such as the Honest Ads Act, and that's an important step for election integrity. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of that bill. But we need to address other broader issues as well. And today you've said you'd be open to some regulation, but this has been a pretty general conversation. So will you commit to working with Congress to develop ways of protecting constituent privacy and well-being, even if it means that results in some laws that will require you to adjust your business model?
Senator, yes, we will commit to that. I think that's an important conversation to have. Our position is not that regulation is bad. I think the internet is so important in people's lives, and it's getting more important.
Yep.
The expectations on internet companies and technology companies overall are growing. And I think the real question is, what is the right framework for this, not should there be one?
That is very helpful. And I think the other question, and it doesn't just go to Facebook, is whether the framework should include financial penalties when large providers like Facebook are breached and privacy is compromised as a result. Because right now there is very little incentive for whether it's Facebook or Equifax to actually be aggressive in protecting customer privacy and looking for potential breaches or vulnerabilities in their system. So what we hear after the fact, after people's privacy has been breached, after they've taken the harm that comes with that and considerable inconvenience in addition to the harm, we've heard apologies, but there is no financial incentive right now, it seems to me, for these companies to aggressively stand in their consumers' stead and protect their privacy. And I would really look forward to working with you on that and getting your considered opinion about it.
Well, Senator, we look forward to discussing that with you. I would disagree, however, that we have no financial incentive or incentive overall to do this. This episode has clearly hurt us and has clearly made it harder for us to achieve the social mission that we care about. And we now have to do a lot of work around building trust back, which is just a really important part of this.
Well, I thank you. My time is up, and I'll follow up with you on that.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. I want to ask just kind of a process question. You've said more than a few times that Facebook users can delete from their own account at any time. Well, we know in the course I do, I've got grandchildren now, but children, you tell your children, once you make that mark in cyber or in the internet system, it never really goes away. So my question to you is, if once and I think you answered that once an individual deletes the information from their page, it's gone forever from Facebook's archives. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think you raise a good point, though, which is that we will delete it from our systems, but if you've shared something to someone else, then we can't guarantee that they don't have it somewhere else.
Okay, so if somebody leaves Facebook and then rejoins and asks Facebook, can you recreate my past? Your answer would be?
If they delete their account, the answer is no. That's why we actually offer two options. We offer deactivation, which allows you to shut down or suspend your account but not delete the information, because actually a lot of people want to, at least for some period of time, I mean, we hear students with exams coming up want to not be on Facebook because they want to make sure that they can focus on the exam. So they deactivate their account temporarily, but then want the ability to turn it back on when they're ready. You can also delete your account, which is wiping everything. And if you do that, then you can't get it back.
You can't get it back. It's gone from your archives.
Yes.
But is it ever really gone?
From our systems, it is.
From the cloud or wherever it is. I mean, it always seems to be able to reappear in investigations and other things, not necessarily Facebook, but other emails and other things of that nature. What about the information going from the past, the information that's already been in the Cambridge Analytica case? You can't really go back and redo that. So I'm going to assume that what we've been talking with and the improvements that you're making now at Facebook are from this point forward. Is that a correct assumption?
Senator, I actually do think we can go back in some cases. And that's why one of the things that I announced is that we're going to be investigating every single app that had access to a large amount of information before we locked down the platform in 2014. And if we find any pattern of suspicious activity, then we're going to go do a full audit of their systems. And if we find that anyone's improperly using data, then we'll take action to make sure that they delete the data, and we'll inform everyone who may have had their data misused.
Okay, the other suggestion I would make, because we're kind of running out of time here, is you've heard more than a few complaints, and I joined the chorus of the lapse in the time of when you discovered and when you became transparent. And I understand you sent out 2 messages just today to users. So I would say you regret that decision, that you wish you'd been more transparent at the time. So I would imagine if in the course of your investigation you find more breaches, so to speak, that you will be re-informing your Facebook customers.
Yes, that is correct. We have already committed that if we find any improper use, we will inform everyone affected.
Okay, thank you. You've said also that you want to have an active view on controlling your ecosystem. Last week, the FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb addressed a drug summit in Atlanta and spoke on the national opioid epidemic. My state, I'm from West Virginia. And thank you for visiting. And next time you visit, if you would please bring some fiber, because we don't have connectivity in our rural areas like we really need, and Facebook could really help us with that. So Commissioner Gottlieb called upon social media and internet service providers, and he mentioned Facebook when he talked about it, to try to disrupt the sale of illegal drugs, and particularly powerful opioid fentanyl, which has been advertised and sold online. I know you have policies against this. The commissioner is announcing his intention to convene a meeting of chief executives and senior leaders, and I want to know, can I get a commitment from you today that Facebook will commit to having a representative with Commissioner Gottlieb to finalize with this meeting?
Senator, that sounds like an important initiative, and we will send someone.
Okay,
and let me also say that on your point about connectivity, we do have a group at Facebook that is working on trying to spread internet connectivity in rural areas, and we would be happy to follow up with you on that as well. That's something that I'm very passionate about.
That's good. That's good news. Last question I have, just on the advertising. If somebody advertises on Facebook and somebody purchases something, does Facebook get a percentage or any kind of a fee associated with a successful purchase from an advertiser?
Senator, no. The way that the system works is advertisers bid how much it's worth it to them to show an ad or when an action happens. So it's not that we would get a percent of the sale, but let's just use an example. So let's say you're an app developer, and your goal is you want to get more people to install your app. You could bid in the ad system and say, I will pay $3 anytime someone installs this app. And then we basically calculate on our side which ads are going to be relevant for people. And we have an incentive to show people ads that are going to be relevant because we only get paid when it delivers a business result. And that's how the system works.
So it could be you could be paid for the for the sale.
We get paid when the action that the advertiser wants to happen happens.
All right, thank you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you. Been a long afternoon, and I appreciate you being here and taking the time with every single one of us. I'm going to echo a lot of what I've heard my colleagues say today as well. Appreciate you being here, appreciate the apology, but stop apologizing and let's make the change. I think it's time to really change the conduct. I appreciate the fact that you talked about your principles for Facebook. Notice to users on the use of the data and that users have complete control of their data. But the skepticism that I have, and I'm hoping you can help me with this, is over the last, 7 years, I haven't seen really much change in ensuring that the privacy is there and that individual users have control over their data. So let me ask you this. Back in 2009, you made 2 changes to your privacy policy. And in fact, prior to that, most users could either identify only friends or friends of friends as part of their privacy, correct? If they wanted to protect their data, they could identify only friends or friends of friends who could see their data. Isn't that correct?
Senator, I believe that we've had the option for people to share with friends, friends of friends, a custom audience, or publicly for a long time. Okay. I don't remember exactly when we put that in place, but I believe it was before 2009.
So either you can choose only friends or friends of friends to decide how you're going to share that, protect that data, correct?
Those are 2 of the options, yes.
Okay. And in 2011, when the FTC started taking a look at this, they were concerned that if somebody chose only friends, the individual user was under the impression they could continue to restrict sharing of data to limited audience, but that wasn't the case. And in fact, selecting friends only did not prevent users' information from being shared with third-party applications their friend used. Isn't that the case? And that's why the FTC was looking at you and making that change, because there was concern that if you had friends on your page, a third party could access that information. Isn't that correct?
Senator, I don't remember the exact context that the...
So let me help you here, because David Vladeck, who was spent nearly 4 years as director of the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection, where he worked, including on the FTC's enforcement case against Facebook, basically identifies in this article that that was the case, that not only did Facebook misrepresent, and that's why there were 8 counts of deceptive acts and practices, the actual FTC in November's 2011 decree basically required Facebook to give users clear and conspicuous notice and to obtain affirmative, let me jump back here, to do 3 things. The decree barred Facebook from making any further deceptive privacy claims, and it required Facebook get consumers' approval before changing the way it shares their data. And most importantly, the third thing, it required Facebook to give users clear and conspicuous notice and to obtain affirmative express consent before sharing their data with third parties. That was part of the FTC consent decree, correct?
Senator, that sounds right to me.
Okay. So at that time, you were on notice that there were concerns about the sharing of data and information, users' data, including those friends with third parties, correct?
Senator, my understanding...
Well, let me ask you this. Let me do it this way. In response to the FTC consent to make those changes, did you make those changes, and what did you do to ensure individuals' user data was protected and they had notice of that information and that potentially third parties would be accessing that and they had to give express consent? What did you specifically do in response to that?
Senator, a number of things. One of the most important parts of the FTC consent decree that we signed was establishing a robust privacy program at the company headed by our Chief Privacy Officer, Erin Egan.
Can you give me specifics? And I know, and I've heard this over and over again, and I'm running out of time. But here's the concern that I have. It can't be a privacy policy because that's what the consent said it couldn't be. It had to be something very specific, something very simple, like you've heard from my colleagues, and that did not occur. Had that occurred, we wouldn't be here today talking about Cambridge Analytica. Isn't that really true? Had you addressed those issues then, had you done an audit, had you looked at not only the third-party applications, but audited their associated data storage as well, you would have known that this type of data information was being shared. And that's our concern. And that's what I'm saying now. Time just to make the change. It's time to really address the privacy issue. It's time to really come and lead the country on this issue and how we can protect individual users' data and information. I know my time is running out, but I appreciate you being here, and I'm just hoping that you're committed to working with us in the future and addressing these concerns.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for your patience and testimony today. The end is near. I think 1, 2, 3, or 4 people, so that's good news to get out of this hearing. A couple questions for you. To clarify one of the comments made about deleting accounts from Facebook. In the user agreement, it says when you delete IP content, if it is deleted in a manner similar to emptying the recycle bin on a computer. However, you understand that removed content may persist in backup copies for a reasonable period of time. How long is that?
Senator, I don't know sitting here what our current systems are on that, but the intent is to get all the content out of the system as quickly as possible.
And does that mean your user data as well? It talks about IP content. Is that the same thing as your user data? It can sit in backup copies?
Senator, I think that is probably right. I'm not sitting here today having full knowledge of our current state of the systems around wiping all of the data out of backups. So I can follow up with you on that afterwards. But what I can tell you is that
all backups get wiped.
That is certainly the way it's supposed to work.
Has there ever been a failure of that?
Senator, I don't know. If we tell people that we're going to delete their data, we need to do that.
And you do that. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. A couple of other questions. I think that gets to the heart of this expectation gap, as I call it, with users. Facebook, as I understand it, if you're logged into Facebook with a separate browser and you log into another article, open a new tab in the browser, well, you have the Facebook tab open, and that new tab has a Facebook button on it. You track the article that you're reading. Is that correct?
Senator, I think that there is functionality like that, yes.
Do you think users understand that?
Senator, I think that there is a reasonable... I think the answer is probably yes for the following reason. Because when we show a like button on a website, we show social context there. So it says, here are your friends who liked that. So in order to do that, we would have to...
But if you've got your Facebook browser open and you open up the article in the Denver Post and it has a Facebook button on it, you think they know, consumers, users know, that Facebook now knows what article you were reading in the Denver Post?
Well, we would need to have that in order to serve up the like button and show you who your friends were who would also like that.
So I think that goes to the heart of this expectation gap, because I don't think consumers, users necessarily understand that. I mean, and going through this user agreement, as others have, you do need a lawyer to understand it. And I hope that you can close that expectation gap by simplifying the user agreement, making sure that people understand their privacy. Has there ever been a violation outside of the talk about Cambridge Analytica about the privacy settings? Has a privacy setting violation ever occurred outside of Cambridge Analytica?
I'm not aware that we have had systems that have
So the privacy
shown
setting
content.
a user uses have always been respected. There's never been an instance where those privacy settings have been violated.
That's my understanding. I mean, this is the core thing that our company does, is you come to Facebook, you say, hey, I want to share this photo, or I want to send this message to these people.
Has there ever been has there ever been a breach of Facebook data? A hack?
There have been, I don't believe that there has been a breach of data that we are aware of.
Has there ever been a hack?
Yes.
And have those hacks accessed user data?
I don't believe so. I think we had an instance back in 2013 where someone was able to install some malware on a few employees' computers and had access to some of the content on their computers, but I don't believe that they had access to data.
Page. Never affected the user page.
I do not believe so.
Okay. Has the government ever asked to remove a page, have a page removed?
Senator, I believe so.
Okay. And has the government ever, can you get a warrant to join a page, to be on a page, pretending you're a separate user, to be liked by that, to track what that person's doing? Do you need a warrant for that, or can the government just do that, the FBI, anybody?
Senator, I'm not sure I fully understand. You're saying to
we can follow up on that, because I do want to have one final question I want to ask you. A couple days ago, I think Facebook talked about that it would label traditional advocacy as political ads. And for instance, if the Sierra Club was to run a climate change ad, that would be labeled political ad. If the Chamber of Commerce wanted to run or place an ad as this would have an impact on the climate change regulations, would have an impact, and to talk about that through an ad, that would be labeled as political, which is different than current standards of what is political, what is issue advocacy. Is it your intent to label things political that would be in contradiction to federal law?
Senator, the intent of what we're trying to get at is the foreign election interference that we've seen has taken more the form of issue ads than direct political electioneering advertising. So because of that, we think it's very important to extend the verification and transparency to issue ads in order to block the kind of interference that the Russians attempted to do, and I think will likely continue to attempt to do. That's why I think that those measures are important to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Garner. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for being here today, Mark. I appreciate you coming in. I hope this isn't the last time we see you in front of committee. I know we're approaching 5 hours, so it's been a little tenuous, some mental gymnastics for all of us, and I just want to thank you for being here. Facebook is an American company, and with that, I believe you've got a responsibility to protect American liberties, central to our privacy. Facebook allowed a foreign company to steal private information. They allowed a foreign company to steal private information from tens of millions of Americans, largely without any knowledge of their own. Who and how we choose to share our opinions is a question of personal freedom. Who we share our likes and dislikes with is a question of personal freedom. This is a troubling episode that completely shatters that liberty, so that you understand the magnitude of this. Montanans deeply concerned, they are deeply concerned with this breach of privacy and trust. So you've been at this for nearly 5 hours today. So besides taking reactive steps, and I want you to be as concise as you possibly can, what are you doing to make sure what Cambridge Analytica did never happens again?
Thank you, Senator. There are 3 important steps that we're taking here. For Cambridge Analytica, first of all, we need to finish resolving this by doing a full audit of their systems to make sure that they delete all the data that they have, and so we can fully understand what happened. There are 2 sets of steps that we're taking to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The most important is restricting the amount of access to information that developers will have going forward. The good news here is that back in 2014, we actually had already made a large change to restrict access on the platform that would have prevented this issue with Cambridge Analytica from happening again today. Clearly, we did not do that soon enough. If we'd done it a couple of years earlier, then we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But this isn't a change that we had to take now in 2018. It's largely a change that we made back in 2014.
Okay.
There are other parts of the platform that we also similarly can lock down now to make sure that other issues that might have been exploited in the future won't be able to. And we've taken a number of those steps, and I've outlined those in my written statement as well.
Appreciate that, and you feel confident that the actions you've taken thus far, whether it was the ones back in 2014 or the one that you just talked about locking down the other parts, will adequately protect the folks who use Facebook?
Senator, I believe so, although security is never a solved problem.
So all I need, You talked about a full audit of Cambridge Analytica systems. Can you do a full audit if that information is stored somewhere, some other country?
Senator, if right now we're waiting on the audit because the UK government is doing a government investigation of them, and I do believe that the government will have the ability to get into the systems even if we can't.
If information is stored in the UK, but what if it's stored in some other country? What if the information is stored in some other country? Is an audit even possible?
Well, Senator, we believe a bunch of the information that we will be able to audit. I think you raise an important question, and if we have issues, then if we are not able to do an audit to our satisfaction, we are going to take legal action to enable us to do that. And also I know that the UK and US governments are also involved in working on this as well.
I don't really, I'm telling you, I have faith in the US government. I really actually have faith in the UK too. There have been claims that this information is being stored in Russia. I don't care. It could be stored anywhere in the world. I don't know how you get access to that information. I'm not as smart as you are about tech information. And so the question really becomes, and I got to move on, but the question is, I don't see how you can perform a full audit if they've got stuff stored somewhere else that we can't get access to. That's all. Maybe you have other ideas on how to do that.
Well, I think we'll know once we get in there whether we feel like we can fully investigate everything.
Just real quickly, Senator Schatz asked a question earlier about data and who owns the data. I want to dig into it a little bit more. You said, and I think multiple times during this hearing, that I own the data on Facebook if it's my data.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you that I think that sounds really good to me. But in practice, let's think about this for a second. You're making about $40 billion a year on the data. I'm not making any money on it. It feels like you own the data. And in fact, I would say that the data that was breached through Cambridge Analytica, which impacted, and correct me if these numbers are wrong, some 80 million Americans. My guess is that few, if any, knew that that information was being breached. If I own that data, I know it's being breached. So could you give me some sort of idea on how you can really honestly say it's my data when, quite frankly, they may have goods on me. I don't want them to have any information on me.
Senator, when I
if
say
I own it, I can stop it.
Yes. So, Senator, when I say it's your data, what we mean is that you have control over how it's used on Facebook. You clearly need to give Facebook a license to use it within our system, or else the service doesn't work.
Yeah, I know, and this license has been brought up many times today, and I'm going to be quiet in just 1 second, Mr. Chairman. But the fact is the license is very thick, maybe intentionally so people get tired of reading it and don't want to. Look, Mark, I appreciate you being here. I look forward to having another hearing. Thank you.
Senator Young.
Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks so much for being here and enduring the many questions today. I think it's important you're here because your social media platform happens to be the ubiquitous social media platform, and there's not a senator that you heard from today that isn't on Facebook, that doesn't communicate with our constituents through Facebook. In a sense, we have to be on it. And so I think it's especially important that you're here, not just for Facebook, but really for our country and beyond. The threshold question that continues to emerge here today is what are the reasonable expectations of privacy that users ought to have? And I'll tell you, my neighbors are unsatisfied by an answer to that question that involves, take a look at the user agreement. And I think there's been a fair amount of discussion here about whether or not people actually read that user agreement. I would encourage you to, survey that, get all the information you can with respect to that, and make sure that user agreement is easy to understand and streamlined and so forth. Mr. Zuckerberg, earlier in today's hearing, you drew a distinction that I thought was interesting. It caught my attention. It was a distinction between consumer expectation of privacy, depending upon whether they were on an ISP, or the pipes of the Internet, as you characterized it, or on an edge platform like Facebook. I find this distinction somewhat unsatisfying because most folks who use the internet just think of it as one place, if you will. They think of it as the internet as opposed to various places requiring different degrees of privacy. Could you speak to this issue and indicate whether you'd support a comprehensive privacy policy that applies in the same manner to all entities across the entire internet ecosystem?
Senator, sure. I think that people's expectations of how they use these different systems are different. Some apps are very lightweight, and and you can fully encrypt the data going across them in a way that the app developer or the pipes in the ISP case probably shouldn't be able to see any of the content. And I think you probably should have a full expectation that no one is going to be introspecting or looking at that content.
Give me some quick examples, if you would, kindly, sir.
Sure. Well, when data is going over the Verizon network, I think it would be good for that to be as encrypted as possible, and such that Verizon wouldn't look at it, right? I think that that's what people expect, and I don't know that being able to look at the data is required to deliver their service. That's how WhatsApp works too. So that's an app. It's a very lightweight app. It doesn't require us to know a lot of information about you, so we can offer that with full encryption, and therefore we're not looking. We don't see the content. For a service like Facebook or Instagram, where you're sharing photos and then people want to access them from lots of different places, people kind of want to store that in a central place, so that way they can go access it from lots of different devices. In order to do that, we need to have an understanding of what that content is. So I think the expectations of what Facebook will have knowledge of versus what an ISP will have knowledge of are just different.
I think that needs to be clearly communicated to your users, and we'll leave it at that. Those different levels of privacy that the user can expect to enjoy when they're on your platform. I'd like to sort of take a different tack to internet privacy policy with you, sir. Might we create stronger privacy rights for consumers, either through creating a stronger general property right regime online, say a new law that states unequivocally, something that you said before, that users own their online data, or through stronger affirmative opt-in requirements on platforms like yours? Now, if we were to do that, would you need to retool your model if we were to adopt one of those two approaches?
Senator, can you repeat what the approaches are again?
Yeah, so one is to create a stronger property right for the individual online through a law that states unequivocally users own their data. The other one is a stronger affirmative opt-in requirement to be a user on Facebook. Would you have to fundamentally change the Facebook architecture to accommodate those policies?
Senator, those policies and the principles that you articulated are generally how we view our service already. So depending on the details of what the proposal actually ends up being, and the details do just matter a huge amount here, it's not clear that it would be a fundamental shift. But the details really matter, and if this is something you're considering or working on, we would love to follow up with you on this, because this is very important to get right.
I'd love to work with you. I'm out of time. Thank you.
Senator Thune has a closing comment. And I have a process statement for everybody to listen to.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thanks to all of our members for their patience. Been a long hearing, particularly long hearing for you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you for sitting through this, but I think this is important. I do have a letter here from the Motion Picture Association of America that I want to get into the record without objection.
Without objection, so ordered.
And just a quick sort of wrap-up question, if you will, and maybe one quick comment. But you've answered several questions today about efforts to keep bad actors, whether that's a terrorist group to a malicious foreign agent, off of your platform. You've also heard concerns about bias at Facebook, particularly bias against conservatives. And I just, as a final question, can you assure us that when you are improving tools to stop bad actors, that you will err on the side of protecting speech, especially political speech, from all different corners?
Senator, yes, that's our approach. if there is an imminent threat of harm, we're going to take a conservative position on that and make sure that we flag that and understand that more broadly. But overall, I want to make sure that we provide people with the most voice possible. I want the widest possible expression, and I don't want anyone at our company to make any decisions based on the political ideology of the content.
Okay. And just one final observation, Chairman Grassley. Mr. Zuckerberg has answered a lot of questions today, but there are also a lot of promises to follow up with some of our members. And sometimes on questions about Facebook practices that seem fairly straightforward, but I don't think we have. I think it's going to be hard for us to fashion solutions to solve some of this stuff until we have some of those answers. And you had indicated earlier that you're continuing to try and find out who among these other analytics companies may have had access to user data that they were able to use. And hopefully, as you get those answers, you will be able to forward those to us. And it'll help shape our thinking in terms of where we go from here. So, but overall, I think it's a very informative hearing, Mr. Chairman, and so I'm ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't make this comment, but your response to him in regard to political speech, I won't identify the CEO I had a conversation with yesterday, but one of our platforms, and he admitted to being more left than right, or I mean being left, I guess is what he admitted, and I don't know, I'm not asking you what you are, but but just so you understand that that probably as liberals have a lot of concerns about you know, the leaning of Fox News, or conservatives have questions about the leaning of MSNBC, let's say. It seems to me that when we get, whether it's from the right or the left, so I'm speaking to you for your platform, there's a great deal of cynicism in American society about government generally. And then when there is suspicions, legitimate or not, that maybe you're playing it one way unfairly towards the other, it seemed to me that everything you can do to lean over backwards to make sure that you are fair in protecting political speech, right or left, that you ought to do it. And I'm not telling you how to do it, and I'm not saying you don't do it, but we got to do something to reduce this cynicism. At my town meetings in Iowa, I always get this question: how come you guys in D.C. can't get along? You know, meaning Republicans and Democrats. Well, I try to explain to them that they kind of get a obtuse, what would you say, a review of what goes on here, because controversy makes news. So if people are getting along, you never hear about that. So they get a distorted view of it. And really, we congressmen get along more than the public thinks. But these attitudes of the public, we got to change. And people of your position and your influence, you can do a lot to change this. Whether I know you got plenty of time to run your corporation, through your corporation or privately, anything you can do to reduce this cynicism, because we have a perfect constitution. Maybe it's not perfect, but we got a very good constitution, the longest one written constitution in the history of mankind. But if people don't have faith in the institutions of government, and then it's our responsibility to enhance that faith so they have less cynicism in us. You know, we don't have a very strong democracy just because we got a good constitution. So I hope that everybody will do whatever they can to help enhance respect for government, including speaking to myself. I got to bend over backwards to do what I can so I don't add to that cynicism. So sorry you had to listen to me. So this concludes today's hearing. Thanks to all the witnesses for attending. The record will be open for 14 days for the members to submit additional written questions, and for the witness, Mr. Zuckerberg, to make any corrections to his testimony. The hearing is adjourned.